So I'm going to talk to you about, there's going to be a section on Forge. I'm the product owner for Forge, so of course I'm going to talk about that and all the awesome things you can do with it. But first I wanted to give you just a couple of tips for when you're going to build your modules, hopefully share them on Forge. Just some tips to do there, and mainly talking about data binding in Puppet 3, which is one of the big push I'm trying to make to get people to start using data bindings and publishing modules on Forge so they use them as well. So I gave you a little bit of this before. I'm a sysadmin from Penn State, did a lot there. I miss being there, but I decided to move away and fly around the country, fly around the world, helping people as a professional services engineer use Puppet, do better things in Puppet. I would teach our education courses and things of that nature. Good time flying around, but decided that was a little much for me and wanted to settle back down in awesome Portland, Oregon and work on the Puppet Forge.
Favorite places here.
Yeah?
Awesome.
Portland, Oregon. All right. So I'm going to talk about some practices that I think are good. I don't claim that they're best, so don't yell at me saying yours is better. It might be, and that's awesome. I just want to share some that I think are kind of cool, mainly just around the Puppet Lab style guide. Anybody been to this before? Familiar with it? Few of you? So this is just a document that we have on docs.puppetlabs.com, which is just trying to give you some pointers on how to best write your Puppet manifests and how to build your modules. So it'll give you a couple examples here. This one is purely stylistic to say when you create a resource, quote the title of that resource. This makes it more visually distinguishable. That is, hey, it's a resource title. And it also gives you a little bit of a just habit-forming situation where if you ever put something in, it's a hyphen or an underscore. Like it just parses better as well, but it's mainly stylistic. This one is also stylistic. This is about those, we call them hash rockets or fat comma arrows. There's a lot of different names for it, but this equal greater than sign that separates the thing you want to manage and the value of that thing that you want to manage for any given resource. If you align those, it becomes a lot easier to read. You may remember my OpenStack example from earlier that had 12 or so hash rockets. And if those were all distributed based on how long the variable name was, it becomes harder to read. But this particular rule in the style guide isn't about style and readability. Puppet will not function properly if you don't follow this rule. So this one's about how class and resource type definitions should be stored in their own manifest and should be named consistently. So if you have an Apache module in the manifest directory in inet.pp, you have your class, your class Apache declared. Same goes here to find resource types and so on. I've only given you a snippet here. The style guide will walk you through more examples and exactly what you should be doing. But this is an example of the style guide where you want to be in this style so that when Puppet's loading the code, it follows a predictable path and always finds the class you're looking for, will always find the resource type you're looking for. If anybody remembers using import statements, that's a workaround for not following this part of the style guide. You shouldn't have to import your manifests in order to use them. So there's a command line tool for interacting with our style guide, written by some guys at GitHub, puppet-lint. You can find it at puppet-lint.com or just gem install puppet-lint. And this is a tool that will programmatically analyze your Puppet manifest and tell you what parts of the style guide you are in violation with and offer a little bit to help. So in this example, trailing space was found on line 1, your variable wasn't enclosed in braces on line 56, those things. Some are going to be warnings saying, hey, you probably should do this, like you should quote your resource names, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. And some will be errors. Right? If you have an Apache class that's in apache.pp and not inet.pp in your Apache module, then Puppet-lint will tell you that's wrong. You should be doing it differently. So this is a handy thing to put into your version control hooks. So when you go to commit in SVN or Git or whatever you use, try running this against that manifest first so that you can catch style errors quickly. That's pretty handy. But let's get into the meat of this, which is talking about code versus data. And so what I mean here is when you write your Puppet manifest, traditionally you would express everything about your infrastructure, including the particulars of how it should be implemented. What version of the package should I install? What exact configuration should I give this file? Things of that nature. And that's the data about your model, about the infrastructure that you're building versus the code. So to explain this, walk with me through a little bit of an analogy here. You're at the library. I hear there's a new one on campus that's pretty awesome. And you're trying to study, learn astrophysics or whatever you're learning, and you're picking out some library books. So you're not going to write in those books. You're not going to take your notes. You're not going to try to take this subject material and try to write notes to how you interpret that material. You would take your own notes that are separate from that. So I think that analogy is somewhat analogous to code and data in Puppet. This would be an example of taking both my library book and my notes and putting them into the same file. I have class Forge that has a package Nginx, and I ensure that it's 101. This will work just fine, but instead of taking this model, and obviously I'm simplifying this in the presentation, but imagine you've got a class with many, many resources, many, many particular bits of data. This is fine for that one machine, but as soon as I want to, say, take that version of the package and give another machine version 2.0, I've got to write another manifest, or I've got to use some other tricks to make it happen, and I'm no longer having this single model of how to build out Forge. I have multiple of them, or I have copies in different environments, and so on. To me, that's not very sustainable, and we've built in a better way of handling that. So you can get to a point where, and this is a little bit more complex example, but we have this language feature called parameterized classes that were introduced in Puppet 2.6, and the whole point behind that is saying, I have a class, and it needs two pieces of data that I'm calling package and package underscore version. And then within my class, I can use those pieces of data to build out my model. And you don't have to go all the way that I did here and make both of them variable. You could have Nginx in here as your package name, because maybe for Forge it'll always be Nginx, and if we change it to Apache, that's a big deal that requires changing this manifest anyway. But at least for package version, it's good to have that separated out. And to get access to where that data came from, so you notice in that manifest I didn't specify the version number anymore. We have this feature called data bindings. And its core job is to go and retrieve the value for that piece of data. By default, it uses Hiera. So data bindings is really just an abstraction layer on top of pieces of software that are meant to give you key value pairs of data. So Hiera is what we've been using. You can use it in 2.7. It's built into Puppet 3 now. It ships as part of the packaging. And it's a key value lookup store. So if you say to Hiera, hey, Forge package, what's the value? It'll come back and give you a value of that package. Package version, stuff like that. So a lot of times when I've shown data bindings to people before, it just seems a little crazy. It seems a little automatic. And it is, but hopefully after I explain it to you, it'll make sense and you'll understand the logic that's going on here and see the power of it. So let's start with this scenario. You have your Puppet master, and you have a secret agent. And that secret agent has data about himself. He's James Bond, his client certificate is James Bond, and he's running the Red Hat operating system. So whenever he checks in, he sends that up to the Puppet master, and the Puppet master says, great, James Bond has checked in, but I don't know what to do. I gotta go figure out what is the model that I'm supposed to enforce here. That's the Puppet master's question to itself. But it now knows I've got James Bond, he's on Red Hat, I know his network interfaces, all of those facts about him. So effectively, and I'm glossing over some details here, but the Puppet master asks its external node classifier, hey, I've got node James Bond. What classes belong to James Bond? And let's imagine that the answer is just Forge. Obviously, in a real environment, you're going to have many classes that come back in these results, and you're going to be iterating over those classes to this next part of the process. So let's say we have a class Forge. The next step in the process is the Puppet master needs to find the Forge module. So it can find the Forge class. So it's going to look in your module path, and then it's going to get to a point where it finds that class. All right, and that's the class I just showed you before. And now the Puppet master has a question of, oh, I have class Forge, but it needs two pieces of data in order to function. It needs package name and package version. So I did a typo there. Imagine that we're looking up Forge package name. Pulp Master is going to go through the data bindings abstraction layer and say, okay, I need this piece of data. Go make it happen. So data bindings will consult Hira by default. You can configure another data source on the back end if you don't wish to use Hira, but you get the same benefits that I'm going to show you. But let's say we're using Hira. The next thing, I'll give you some details about how Hira works, is it has this hierarchy of data lookup. The whole point behind Hira is that you want a key value pair. You're saying, here's the key, forge package, and I want a name back from Hira. Hira's whole mechanism of doing that is to give you a hierarchical, hence the name, a hierarchical lookup of that data based on whatever logic matters to you. So in this example, I'm saying whenever I want to look up a piece of data, I first want to check to see if I have something that's specific to the client cert I get back, James Bond. Then I'm going to check to see if I have data relevant to the operating system Red Hat. Then I'm going to go to something that isn't a fact at all, it's just a common file source, kind of like my default. So it's going to go through and look up this data on whatever these are. You could use any fact or any other piece of data to make this determination. So if you have a custom fact, for instance, that determines what data center you're in, data center could be one of the steps in your hierarchy lookup. It could also be OS family. It could be the production environment, the environment variable in Puppet. But anyway, we have this hierarchy for looking at the data. The other half to Hira is the data backends. Hira isn't explicit or doesn't tell you how you must store your data. It gives you some options. By default, you can store the data about your nodes in structured text as JSON or YAML. And you can get other backends as well. Two examples would be MySQL and Redis, but there are others as well. I'll give you a couple more examples. But those are specifying the data that I want to look up. And so let's say it goes through data bindings, it consults Hira, I go through my hierarchy, I'm using the YAML backend, and I get screen at the end of the day for my forge package. So let's see exactly how that lookup happened. I have my hierarchy on the top left. This is how Hira resolves its data lookup. On the top right, I'm extrapolating out the facts that James Bond gave me, because Hira is going to use those facts when it's looking through its hierarchy. So that if I'm using that YAML backend, the first file Hira consults is jamesbond.yaml, because that's my client cert. Do I see forge package? No, just region. That's useful, but I still need forge package. So I move on to redhat.yaml, which is my operating system file. So I can have all the data that's appropriate to the Red Hat operating system. A good use case for that is like an SSH package name. Right? So if you have operating system in your hierarchy, SSH package name will be one thing on Red Hat, something else on Debian. But I don't have forge package there, so I'm going to go into common, my fallback, and the last point in the lookup, forge package is screen. This is a hierarchical lookup, so if I had forge package here and it was tmux and not screen, I would get tmux back. With me so far? I forgot to mention earlier that unlike this morning's presentation, feel free to ask questions as you see them.
So is the hierarchy defined globally, or can you have different hierarchies for different sets of?
So the question was, is the hierarchy defined globally, or can you have different sets, I imagine, for different use cases? Is that what you're looking for? So the hierarchy is actually on the next slide here. You would configure it at a per Hira instance basis. But this hierarchy can be somewhat complex, and you can end up adding in multiple lookup values. So imagine that you have, a data center is the one I keep going to, is where you would want to split. You could end up having data center over here, and then use data center in each of these lookup values, so that the first part of that data file is the data center, and then you do other lookups. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That would be how I would say you kind of have a split in the hierarchy at that point. But in terms of what Hira does, it's just one hierarchy of factor lookups. Any other questions on how this workflow works? I'm going to show you some more on it in just a minute, but make sure you're with me. It's not too, and really the best thing you can do with it is get like a notify resource and start playing with it. It's change values around, and within 5 minutes you can see exactly how things work around. Oops, let me go back and show you. One other point about this is just a YAML expression of how Hira should be configured. You specify the data backends, and you can have multiple. So you could go through this entire hierarchy and look through all my YAML data and find nothing. and then move over to my JSON, or move over to my MySQL database. And then the hierarchy is here, and you specify where to find the data for each of your backends, so you can get kind of flexible and crazy with it. The example I usually give is, some team loves working with JSON, another team loves working with YAML. You can keep your data stores separate in different places. You just have to tell the puppet master where to find them. Lost my remote. So how do you use it? Back in the day, and some of you may still be doing this, if you wanted to use Hira, if you look on line 3 of this middle section here, you would just specifically call out the Hira function with the key that you're looking for, forge package. That top image is that data file that has forge package in it, and the bottom one would be where I declare my class. So all I had to do was say, this node gets forge class, and forge would get used, and it would call out to Hira and retrieve the package name. So a couple things about that. Using the parser function instead of, excuse me, my remote just came back. Using the parser function instead of Puppet 3's functionality is slower. It has to go some a roundabout way of getting to Hira instead of directly accessing the Hira libraries. And it locks you into Hira. If you ever wish to keep your model as it is, but extract out the data to something else, you don't have that option. You have to go and manipulate your manifest down the line. So this was a better way to do it. The only change I made there was 1 through 3. I changed it to be a parameterized class declaration. If you're familiar with parameterized classes, it's this different way of declaring the class. Instead of saying include forge, I make it look like a resource type. And what I can do there is pass in package, the one piece of data that I need for my class. I can pass in package, give it tmux, and that's an explicit value. If I didn't give one, it would default to a Hira lookup, but you're still in the same situation of it being slower, you're locked into Hira. So really all you have to do to take advantage of data bindings is create your class like this, and the only thing you say is, hey, I've got a package variable that I need, and I might give it a default value. Equals SSH is the default value. It has nothing to do with Hira, and then all you have to do is say, oh, I'm going to include forge, and you'll automatically get the data bindings lookup. Let me show you the order of that. It's pretty simple once you get it. So that first step, when Puppet's looking up a piece of data, is to take a look at that explicit class declaration. In the top right, there's my declaration. So that's a parameterized class that I'm saying for this node gets forge class with package screen. When Puppet sees that, it says, okay, that's authoritative. End of story. You've told me explicitly it's screen, so it's screen. It will do nothing else. It'll go back and compile a catalog, and you'll get your manifests. Everything's done. The second step, of course, is to go through data bindings. You'll go through that flow chart that I showed you before. It'll consult Hira. It'll go through its hierarchy backend and say, okay, I'm looking for this data. I'm looking for this data. Okay, I found it. I'm going to retrieve that back. If it goes through all of Hira and you didn't specify forge package anywhere, it'll come through and get the default value from your class. In this particular image, package is equal to Apache as a default value. So if I had nothing in Hira, I'd fall back to Apache. So that's really handy in your model to say, this is how my machine should be configured, and if no one's taken any action for this class, I'll default to some same values. You don't always want that. But if you don't want that, like for package version, you must specify a package version. If nobody put that particular piece of data in Hira, Puppet will fail with a compilation error, saying, hey, I couldn't find the value for package version. Go ahead.
Just a little unclear here. You've got data explicitly defined in your classes, as we do now in the ancient pre-historical world of Puppet Vector 5. We've got, as we integrate into Hira will automatically override those values if there is a value in there without setting something up, or do you have to configure Hira so that the Hira values, so that essentially whatever your default value in the defined class has a position in the hierarchy?
Okay.
Where does Hira come in and jump on top of that default value? Is that by default, or?
It is in that second thing. I think the piece you might be missing is that first image on the top right is a language feature that's only available in Puppet 2.6 or later.
Right, well, we're getting there, so.
Okay, all right. But once you're there, that's an explicit class declaration. That's like saying include Forge, but except I'm saying Forge must have package screen. So I explicitly declared that. That's the first thing on my lookup list. Hyra will never come into play for the package variable. If that's not there, and you say have package versions, and I didn't specify that in the top right, I have a piece of data that my class, as I've defined it, package version, it needs this to survive. So it's going to go through this lookup. In the top right, my package declaration doesn't have package version, my class declaration rather. So then I query data bindings, which by default means Hyra. So it's going to go through and pull out Hyra. If I find package version, I'm done. If I don't find it, that's when I use the class defaults. So as I've defined it, if I say package equals Apache, that only comes into play if Hyra does not have the value. Is that more clear? So what you do in your class is to create default values. Hyra will override those because it's meant to be a fallback method.
I guess I don't understand the difference between the top slide and the bottom slide. As far as the top one doesn't get overridden and the bottom one does.
The top slide is not a definition of a class, it is a declaration of a class. It is akin to saying include Forge in your node declaration. It's just a new style of doing that, and the advantage that it gives you is the ability to explicitly declare data about that class. To be fair, that concept was pre-data bindings, so it's going to be on its way out if data bindings satisfies everybody's needs. Because there's no, why would you, if you start using Hyra as your authority, you'll find yourself not using that particular feature anymore. Any other questions about this?
With Hyra, would you, like, so you have a single package declared here using with Hyra. Can you do this for multiple packages?
You can do it for any piece of data. Anytime you would ever make a variable in Puppet's language,
Okay.
you can consult that from Hyra. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I was just seeing that in that class declaration, we were saying I want an array of packages and supply that. Is that up to the module to determine that?
It would be up to this. So if you say packages screen and you give that an array instead, that array is going to come in right here. And so you have to know that, hey, the package resource, when presented with an array as a title, will create multiple package resources.
I see.
The back.
So I'm still not understanding this. So that top one, that class.pp, you're saying if we wanted to use Hyra, we would not do it like that. Is that correct? That class.pp.
You know, that would be if you explicitly don't want Hyra to be in use.
Okay.
I think I should have made a better slide here. Again, that's saying, it's one of these. If I have a node definition of my node, right? Sorry, I'm starting to write it like a class. And then in here, I could do include Apache, for instance, but this is just saying I have class Forge, and this would be akin to saying I want to include Forge, but I'm just saying I don't care about anything else in the system. I really, really, really want the package to be screwed. So it is about specifically overriding anything else that would happen. And imagine that I also don't have package version here, but this is needed by my class definition, then Hyra would look up for package version. And that would be keynote. So that would be my definition in the bottom right.
Okay, so then you're saying that class PP, that top one, if we wanted to use Hyra, we would not do that. That top.
Yes.
Okay. Then if we wanted to use Hyra, what would we put in class.pp?
You just say include Forge.
Okay, just include Forge.
Just
and
include
then
Forge and then
normally we would get the default values, but if we're using Hyra, it'll override the default values in the class.
exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, so if you say include Forge, the Puppet Master takes a look at these two pieces of data and says, I need to find values for these pieces of data, and it will go through this workflow to find them. Hyra being the main component of that workflow.
So if I want, there's a default value, and if I want to override that, I can put that in query. And if I even want to override that, put that in the explicit declaration.
Yep. And I'll give you guys a demo of that today during the demo. I'll just show you how this works in action, so you can see it that way too.
So I do my testing, I use Puppet environments. And so if I want to change a version of a package, for example, I can go in, change the version, test that on my environment with the no-op report to see what it's going to do. Is there some analog for that with Hyra where I can test things out like when
There is. So the question, if anybody didn't hear it, was if he's using environments and he wants to make changes in his manifest for environments, how would you do that in Hyra? Any part of your hierarchy, environment is a variable that you get from Puppet. So it'll say production, development, whatever your environment names are, you can have those in your hierarchy and then just change the data in Hira, and you don't have to touch the manifest at all. And that's one of the core ideas behind this concept, is that you shouldn't have to, you should be able to define what your class is and then never touch it again during the normal use of that class.
So you said before you might have different teams using different data sources for the data binding. How do you keep them from stepping on each other's feet in Hira? Like if my one group named a variable and the other group named the same variable, like how does it know which one to use?
Okay, so the question, if anybody else didn't hear that, is what happens if two teams are creating two variables with the same name in Hira? Remember that in Puppet 3.0's world, variables must be fully scoped. So they must be class name, variable name. So the only time you come into when people are creating two values of the same is if they've created two classes that have the same name. And that's just not going to work in Puppet's reality. And so if you're breaking that out by environment, you've got separate files per environment. If you're breaking, you basically won't get into that situation. Puppet won't let you. So I'm going to move forward in the presentation. Feel free to ask questions about stuff coming forward, and then I'll try to take more questions on data bindings if we have more time. So the whole point behind data bindings, again, is to abstract things. This is set up by default to use Hira. If you decide you upgrade to Puppet 3 and don't want Hira used at all, you can set your terminus to none to say, don't even call out to Hira, don't waste the second or so it takes to do the lookup, just stop. If you don't want to use Hira as your backend, you have other options. For instance, on the Forge, you can download this Foreman data binding module and start using Foreman. Any Foreman users in the room, by the way? Okay, so there's a few. For those of you using Foreman, you can use this instead of Hira. If you're storing all your class parameter data in Foreman, and you have that option, you can get the same extraction layer from Puppet. And the best thing about that is that any features we add in that start using data bindings more or other things like that, you're safe. You're not grinding against Puppet anymore. You're using things Puppet's way, but you still get to use Foreman data bindings or any other data bindings that people can write. It's now just another thing that you can extend Puppet with. Just a summary slide that snuck in there. There are also backends to Hira. If you want to use Hira, but you don't want to store your data in YAML or JSON, I mentioned the MySQL backend. There's also a REST interface backend. There's a couple others out there. There's one out there for Redis somewhere, and so on and so on. So really just to sum up, check out the Puppet Labs style guide. Use parameterized classes when possible. Those just give you a better language feature to rely on. And try not to call out to Hira directly if you're on Puppet 3.0. That's built in for you. So let's talk about the Forge for the last couple of minutes here. Puppet Forge at forge.puppetlabs.com is that online place where people, like I said earlier today, can share content that they've already written. So share their Apache module and so on and so forth. Give you a couple more examples. I showed you INI file this morning, which lets you manipulate INI style files. Samba has those. OpenStack has some. Puppet.conf itself is a INI file. This warranty module is pretty cool. I'm a big fan of this one. So you won't just find Puppet manifests on the Forge, you'll find extensions to Puppet on the Forge. This one happens to be extra factor facts. Warranty information for Macintosh, Dell, and Lenovo systems. It's all the way at the bottom here, but the example output that it'll give you is, yes, I do have a warranty. That warranty expires on this date, and it's good for this piece of hardware. And what this person's implemented is the ability to determine the serial number of your machine, and then he calls out to the remote vendor's website, uses that serial number to get back the warranty information, which he exposes as facts. So that if somebody checks in and their warranty's expired, they might do something else with their Puppet configuration or send off an email and tell you it's expired, whatever you want. You also find utilities like this. There's a wget module on the Forge. If you ever want to just curl down, or in this case, wget something down from a website, you can do that with this resource type. And you can even post against a basic auth for those wgets as well. Windows users in here? Anybody? Don't be shy.
Play games.
Okay, playing games. So for Windows users, there's been a lot of content added to the Forge recently for Windows, and the Forge is especially important for anyone who's running Windows with Puppet, because we don't have that many resource types built into Puppet for Windows, but there are a lot on the Forge. One of them is managing IIS, so it's application pools and other configuration pieces of IIS. You can get that from the Forge. Those are reading types. I even have a module up here that's very meta. It's a module for installing modules. It's kind of very early days, but it will let you say, hey, I want module cprice44 INI file on this master. You just run puppet apply and it'll go install it. It's kind of neat. So this one is, if you remember me mentioning earlier, DOM Quail Augius providers, I'm really in love with this module because it offers you all of these various types for managing configuration files on a per value basis. So syslog, syscontrol, sshd config, all these other things to manage individual portions of that file instead of managing the whole thing as a template or a concat, a fragment or whatever. There's some examples on his website for using syscontrol with it. I think those are awesome. You're also going to hear from Jeremy this afternoon after lunch, but he's written a module for interacting with Juniper network devices. You can use Puppet to configure your device to have certain VLANs in place or trunk in various ways. He'll go into more detail on that, but it's pretty cool to be able to express your entire network configuration in Puppet in addition to your systems. So we do have a command line tool for interacting with the Forge. It's a basic tool that just allows you to install modules, list what modules you have installed, search against the Forge if you can't remember the exact name, uninstall them, upgrade them, that kind of stuff. The biggest functionality of that tool for installing is that you have dependencies. So this is the Puppet DB module. If you're unfamiliar with Puppet DB and you wanted to get that going so you can do exported resources or start querying your facts or inventory data, you can download this module and get going with it, but it depends on Chris Price's INI file, it depends on a Postgres module, and it depends on a Firewire module. And the Puppet module tool, if you tell it to install Puppet DB, will automatically go and retrieve those modules and install them for you as well. So in terms of the Forge team, there's just a few of us. There's of course myself, I'm the product owner for it. I am your advocate for making sure the product is built to meet your needs. We have on the left side Melinda, who's our user experience designer, Lauren, who's an awesome tech writer who's been making documentation on Puppet Labs Forge modules and community members modules much better. And in the back, we have our lone engineer, Peter Vanderbruggen, hiding out, and we just hired on a new engineer, so now we have a total of 2, which is awesome, and we're still hiring. If anybody's interested in working with the team, you're more than welcome to, we'd love you. So what we're working on though, and it's been a couple of false starts to this, but we're trying to get an API out there so that you guys can come out, consume information from the Forge, whether it's just retrieving what models we have out there, if you're going to build a tool around the Forge, or you just want to see how many people downloaded your modules. That kind of stuff, we're working on getting our API out there. We were very close to it, but it's just not meeting our needs for our own website, so we need to refactor it some more. We're also, right now, if you're publishing modules to the Forge, you use that Puppet module tool to build a tarball from your source code, and then you go to our website and you fill out a very short form to submit that tarball. It's not that big of a process. Those of you that have published before obviously were able to publish, but it's not ideal. So one of the avenues I'd like to take us for publishing modules is via GitHub. Most people that submit modules in the Forge have their source code on GitHub. And what we're able to do is give you a quick hook to add in a configuration file that tells you what Forge account you have, and you just put that into your repository, and we'll start using Travis, for instance, to build out a module tarball published to the Forge. And right now we're working on making that process even better and making it like a one-click install, so you can just say, yeah, this module, start publishing it every time I submit a new tag. So if you're interested in that, send me an email, ryan@puppetlabs.com. Right now, this functionality is sort of in a beta state. It's invite only, but we need more feedback, we need more users of it, and we're gonna get it to the point where we unleash it on the world. So anybody that's been to Forge and has tried to search the Forge has noticed that we're not doing as good as we could do. So this is a mock-up, this isn't the live site, but we are building in this functionality and we're getting close to shipping it. So the first bit is being able to sort modules by various things, and the default sort will be a lot more useful than it is right now. But you'll also be able to sort on latest release, most downloads, stuff like that. And then on the left side, we're working on filters, so that you can say, I'm looking for a MySQL module, but I want types and providers. So you can get a module that only has types and providers. Or I want a module that works on Red Hat. Right? those kind of things, just to be able to start filtering the results down very soon. In terms of module count, as I mentioned in the State of the Puppet talk earlier, we had very little last year, and it's just been going a little crazy. We hit 1,000 in Q1 of this year, and then I'm projecting out to, obviously, those numbers by the end of this year. Lots of people are contributing their content. We're making the Forge even better to find that content, find high-quality content. I know that's a bit of a hole right now, but as I mentioned, we have a small team, and we're trying to ramp up, so we're hopefully going to catch up before you guys get us to our 4,000th module. The last thing I want to talk about, and I just want to skip over this a little bit, is the idea of on-premise Forge. So right now you can install the module from the Forge and download it onto your Puppet Master, and that's fine, but your Puppet Master needs to be able to reach the Forge, or you have to do some download it and shuffle it around and get kind of those things. You can't have a workflow of sending the module down behind your firewall. That doesn't work. So I desperately want to build a better functionality to give you the ability to move the Forge, or at least some version of the Forge, onto your own network so that you can interact with it, your own instance of the Forge, and be able to talk to the public Forge from a proxy standpoint. We're not there yet. We need to make search better first. But I do want to point you at the Pulp project. We happen to have someone talking about Pulp today, and this will be this afternoon, so I'm not going to go and belabor this point. But Pulp is Red Hat's tool for RPM repository management, and it does allow you to submit Puppet modules to it. They extended it to allow modules to be stored in this, so you can effectively have an on-premise Forge, you can mirror the public Forge, stuff like that. It's an awesome solution, something that we just don't have to give you today. But if you do this, if you watch Michael's talk later and you get really excited about it, please email me just to tell me you're doing it, give me some feedback about how Pulp is working for you. At the very least, I want a heads up that you're about to synchronize all 1,000 modules from my Forge onto your network. Just a heads up. Awesome. But look forward to that a little later. We mentioned Puppet test pilots. I'm going to mention it again. I interact with people all the time in Puppet test pilots. There's nothing that makes me happier than sitting down with a prototype of what we're building on Forge with people that actually use it and solving problems with it, telling us how it could be better or whether or not it meets their needs. Puppet Labs test pilots, check that out. Again, education. As a former professional services engineer, I'm a big advocate of this. I loved our courses. They're very effective. And there's online learning on the way too. So if you can't go to one of our individual courses, you can do that. And Tiffany reminded me, she has posted out there behind where you got your shirts, the full list. But for that advanced course that I talked about earlier, excuse me, there is a course in Hershey on May 29th. So if you wanted to go out there soon in Hershey, Pennsylvania, apparently it's an awesome facility and you will get free chocolate. Otherwise, there's plenty coming up here soon. In fact, one in DC and Boston, which are going to be, I think, the closest to here, coming up for Puppet Fundamentals as well, if you're interested in an intro talk, or intro course rather. Join us for PuppetCon. I gave you this pitch already. PuppetCon's going to be awesome. And that's all I have, and I'd like to take more of your questions if you want. I think we have a couple of minutes before lunch arrives. Yes, sir.
You talked about quoting resource names. What if it's a variable?
So if it's a variable,
As a style, should it be in full quotes and interpolated, or can you just use the variable name?
so the style guide will say if you wish to use a variable, that if you're just using the variable standalone, just declare the variable. If you're using it as part of a string, you should double quote it, interpolate it, and there's an operator, your $, curly brace, variable, curly brace. The style guide suggests that so that it's very clear where the variable begins and ends, and you can have other bits in your string. Thank you, everybody.